Sensors in Corridor 4 reported absolute metabolic silence. Across the thermal scanners, no heat signatures flickered. Yet, against the soles of Morven's boots, the deck plating groaned with the rhythmic impact of heavy boots. That sound, the security team had tracked for 3 kilometers. Not a single warning had been issued by the automated grid. Within the surveillance hub, the junior security lead stared at his thermal readouts, watching the empty gray sweep of the corridor while the audio pickups redlined with the thud-thud-thud of a marching predator. I've seen predators strike with lightning speed, but this was different. By the time you realize you're tired, it's already too late. Stay close. Deep within the archival stacks of the Drellkani Academy, a single encrypted file pulse-coded as urgent began to unfurl. Its header was dated 3 centuries before the first human trade ship entered the sector. Across the encrypted data stream flowed a warning that had been buried under diplomatic niceties for generations. Behind Morven, the transit corridor smelled of the sulfur tang of recycled coolant and the salt of his own sweat. He shook the tracking fob in his hand, but the EO-11 model only flickered with a weak, dying amber light. Behind the sealed blast doors of the primary hub, his squad sat slumped against the bulkheads. Only 14 cycles old was TheyLocked, the youngest drone operator in the unit. He was whistling now, a thin, reedy sound that Morven knew was a symptom of rising stress. TheyLock's scales were turning a dull, chalky gray, a sign that the humidity was overwhelming his internal thermoregulation. "Is she still moving?" TheyLocked asked, his voice cracking like dry parchment. "The audio doesn't lie," Morven replied, his own throat parched, which meant the human was still walking. For 6 hours, Jada Lynn had not broken her stride. In the flickering playback of the surveillance drones, Morven watched her. She paused for a single moment to check her wrist chronometer, her face a mask of bored indifference before she continued her path. Down the narrow maintenance shafts drifted the sound of her yawn. To Morven's ears, it sounded like the death rattle of a species about to collapse. He watched on the screen as Jada stumbled, her left foot catching on a junction plate. "Terminal atrophy," Morven whispered, a surge of predatory hope warming his blood. "Her muscles are liquefying. Her heart cannot sustain the pace." In the Academy files, the data told a different story. Humans, the text explained, were not built for the sprint. They lacked the explosive pounce of the Drellkani or the crushing strength of the Korath. Instead, they possessed a biological horror known as the persistence engine. While other species relied on anaerobic bursts that flooded their limbs with paralyzing lactic acid, the human body was a radiator of liquid efficiency. Beneath the red emergency lighting that turned every face the color of old blood, Morven gripped the tracking fob. He watched Jada Lynn on the monitor. She wasn't fleeing like prey. She was just waiting for them to die. Across the thermal sensors of the lower decks, the silence deepened into a physical weight. Through the recycling vents drifted the metallic scent of ozone and the rhythmic, unending thud of Jada Lynn's stride. Behind the security barricades, the members of Morven's squad were no longer soldiers. They were gasping, broken organisms. Total biological collapse. In the archive thread, the decryption reached the core logic of the ancient Drellkani warning. To the Academy historians, the human anatomy was a puzzle of cooling vents and liquid efficiency. While every other known predator in the sector relied on a singular, explosive burst of power, the humans were built to leak heat. They possessed millions of microscopic glands designed to coat their skin in moisture, a biological radiator that allowed them to shed the lethality of their own exertion. On the monitors, Morven watched Jada turn a corner. Through the thermal haze limped the last of the drone outriders, its anti-grav thrusters whining in mechanical agony. TheyLocked, the youngest operator, let out a wet, rattling sob as his headset slipped from his chalky scales. His fingers had curled into rigid, useless talons, a symptom of the lactic acid that had turned his blood into poison. "I can't follow her," TheyLocked gasped, his head lolling against the bulkhead. The air is too thick. His cooling vest, Morven tightened with trembling fingers. The Velcro made a dry, rasping sound in the quiet of the corridor. He swallowed the last of the lukewarm nutrient paste, the plastic tube crinkling as he tossed it into the recycler. He adjusted the seal on his gauntlet and looked back at the screen. Jada Lynn had stopped. Behind the security door, Morven held his breath, his predatory instinct sensing the moment of the kill. She was standing in the center of the junction, her shoulders rising and falling in a steady, deep rhythm. He watched her hand reach out to touch the wall, her fingers trailing over the cold steel. In the archive data, the final page of the report flickered into clarity. They do not need to be faster. They only need to be the last ones still moving. In that moment, the security lead realized his blind spot was not a lack of data, but a misunderstanding of the yawn. Jada Lynn wasn't dying. She was ventilating. The stumble he had categorized as muscle failure was merely a shift in weight to keep the blood from pooling in her extremities. The blast doors hissed open. Across the threshold stood Jada. She looked at Morven, her skin glistening with a thin sheen of salt and water. She wasn't even breathing through her mouth. Her pulse, visible in the vein of her neck, was a calm, melodic tap against the frantic drumming of Morven's own heart. "You guys stop when you're tired?" Jada asked, her voice clear and terrifyingly steady. "We just wait for the lactic acid to clear." Morven looked at Taylo, whose eyes were glazed with the onset of heatstroke. The boy was 14, a child who had been pushed into a marathon against a ghost. The junior security lead dropped his weapon, the heavy pulse rifle clattering against the deck plating. The chase was over, not because she had caught them, but because they had run out of world to flee into. By dawn, the Academy's automated systems completed the reclassification of the species. Across every trade route and diplomatic channel, the designation for Homo sapiens shifted from low-threat merchant to apex persistence predator. The corridor lights flickered in the morning surge. Jada Lynn walked toward the transit docks with a smooth, effortless gait. Beneath the bench, the EO-11 tracking fob lay on its side. Its casing was cracked and gray. The small amber light had finally gone dark.